the Housing Policy Coordinator with Leadership Council. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to be talking about community engagement for a successful AHSC application. And I just want to pass it over to my colleague, Emma, who will be co-presenting with me.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Emma de la Rosa, and I'm the Regional Policy Manager for Leadership Council. I'm based in Bakersfield, and my pronouns are she, ella. Welcome.
Thanks, Emma. Okay, I think we can start. Is that okay with folks? Okay, cool. Next, can you go to the slide? Next slide, please. Okay, so hi everyone. So today we're going to be talking about the community engagement portion for the AHSC application. Like I said, we're from Leadership Council. We work primarily in the San Joaquin and East Coachella Valley, and we work closely with communities in both communities. And so today we're going to be talking about the importance of community engagement for the AHSC application. So community engagement is a critical component to the AHSC application. Oh, excuse me, I'm losing my slides. So it's a very important component of the application. A lot of the times residents and communities don't get included in these conversations. And so when you are working on the AHSC application for the community, for the narrative prompt, residents and communities know what's best and what type of housing they want or need in their communities. And so that's why this section is really important. Like I said, a lot of the times they get excluded from these conversations when it comes to like the general plans or, the type of neighborhoods they want to see, the type of housing they want to see. And so this is one of the reasons why this was added in that, is just getting that community engagement and really knowing where these projects are needed in these communities. And although the community benefits and engagement section is only a maximum of six points, it does cover it's part of like a wider part of the narrative prompt, which is a total of 18 points, which, it also includes the workforce, the anti-displacement sections. And again, why it's really important to engage the community directly to kind of understand and know how you're going to answer these prompts. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about the narrative prompt itself. I just jotted down two of the questions here that are in the round 8 application. So, one of them asks how the project addresses the needs as identified by the community, including climate adaptation and resiliency, public health, active transportation, transit, or other areas beyond the affordable housing development component, and which, if any, changes were made to the project design components, program activities, or implementation team as a direct result of stakeholder feedback. So when you are having these community workshops with residents, and a lot of the times what we find when we're talking to residents is trying to simplify a lot of these terms and really make it easy to understand and digestible for them. So as an example, when you're talking about including climate adaptation and resiliency, what does that mean to someone, right? A lot of the times the way we ask these questions are like, in your current home, do you feel comfortable when there's like an extreme, like a heat wave, or how do you deal with that? Does your home have the capacity to deal with that? Or when there has been floods, like what are the barriers, or how does your neighborhood or your home deal with floods? Like, have you had any issues with that? So simplifying it so you can actually get as much information from residents and communities. Um, and then I do also want to say that as you're working on on the narrative prompts, it's also really important to look at AHSC narrative rubric instructions, because it kind of gives you a guide of how you'll be able to answer these questions to get the most points possible. And if you all haven't been able to look at it, I would really suggest that you do. It has a lot of great information, and it helps you guide how you're going to respond. We could put a link to it in the chat later on, but just as an example, it gives you kind of a way of like how you can get the most maximum points. So let's say it's 3 points. You would have to have a really strong tie to the community. If you worked with a organization, a partner organization that has a strong tie with the community, if there was significant involvement from communities or residents or leadership prior to or during the AHSC proposal. Things like that will definitely guarantee that, well, not guarantee, but make it possible to get the most points possible. Then there's like the other side of it. So, if you don't provide any information, or you have limited ties to the community, you'll get 0 points. So again, I do highly recommend that you look at the narrative rubric instructions, just so you can it could guide you. Okay, next slide, please.
Yes, Giovanni, I just wanted to quickly bring attention to the chat box. There was a comment about the goals and objectives for an AHSC application, and to answer your question, there's been a few links added to the chat where you can be directed. Well, you'll be directed to the goals and the objectives for the program. But in essence, it is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through projects that implement land use, housing, and transportation and agricultural land preservation practices to support infill and compact development, and that support public policy objectives, including reducing air pollution and improving conditions in disadvantaged communities and improving public health. Just to name a few, but I do welcome you to take a look at the YouTube video and the guidelines.
Thanks, Emma. Appreciate it. Sorry, I didn't see the chats. Okay, so kind of going back to the prompt. So this is another example of the prompt, or a prompt in the AHSC application. So it does describe any planned or continued engagement or services, outreach for marketing plan, resident selection process, coordination to support first-time buyer programs, or housing mobility strategies. So again, going back to, using that narrative rubric to kind of help inform and answer these prompts, but also that's where the community engagement really comes in play. Again, residents really know what it is that they want to see in their communities. And so addressing those needs and making sure that you have this continued engagement with them is very important. We'll kind of talk about how to do that in the next couple of slides, but it's really important to keep them informed of the project. A lot of the times residents, when we work on several projects, residents feel like, oh, we only had one community meeting and you told us this one thing, and then you disappear and then we don't know what's going on. So it's really important to have these continued community engagement with residents and communities, so they know what is happening, where the project is, the results, and constantly keeping them informed. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so community engagement is really important and it takes a lot of time. It can take up to 2 to 3 months to reach out to communities, community-based organizations, and other partners that are crucial to your project. It takes time to host workshops, gather information. So we always advise that you do community engagement very early on. It is likely that ASIC applications will likely open in 2025. So you can start doing engagement now. It's never too early for it. The more information and that you gather and incorporate into your application, the better. So then how do we engage community? So, and where do we reach out to residents? Next slide, please. So it is really important to know who the trusted messengers are that can help provide information and connect you with communities. There are several key stakeholders that you can reach out to. Community leaders of disadvantaged communities. Most communities have informal spokespersons. So for example, we work with many communities across the San Joaquin Valley, and within all of these communities, there's always like someone who's very knowledgeable about their neighborhood, their community, where to get resources, how to connect their neighbors to these resources. So those are the persons that you definitely want to connect with. They have strong ties with CBOs, churches, the school. So these are the community leaders that you really want to try and connect with. There's also organizations and entities that are key stakeholders, like community and faith-based organizations are one, nonprofits that work closely with low-income communities or just communities in general, agencies who provide services, churches, again. So if you're ever looking, if you have a project in mind in a particular area, I definitely advise that you kind of look at these places and try to have like meetings and discussions with them to see if they know any community leaders that you can connect with. Also schools, there's a lot of student-led clubs, parent meeting groups, another great way to engage leaders and communities. There's also, because the ASIC application has, that a transportation section, there are a lot of active transportation groups and communities that would also suggest that you reach out to. There's a lot of anti-displacement groups. So for example, a lot of cities across California have tenant unions, and a lot of them are being created because of the housing crisis. And so they're also a really great group to connect with. There's also workforce development groups that you can also reach out to that can be key stakeholders. Next slide, please. So when you've connected with residents and communities and leaders, what's the next step? So the next step is, that's when you gather people and you do community workshops or focus groups. And we always advise that you use existing spaces, spaces that they already go to. If there's meetings that they're having, they already know where to go, where they gather. And that's where we suggest that you host those workshops or focus groups. It's easier for you to go to residents than for them to come to you. You always want to make it as easy as possible for them, because you want to, you're gathering information from them to be able to do the application. And so going to those places is easier for them. You can always do formal or informal groups. There's several examples, and we'll touch on this a little bit in our case study section, but there's times where you can have a very informal conversation, and there's other times where it's a very formal, you have like a focus group. So it really depends on what the community needs and wants. And then you can also use schools. So like a lot of the times parents or students use schools or parts of schools to have these meetings. So highly suggest that. Other informal existing spaces, again, would be like churches or agencies who provide services. There's a lot of CBOs out there that actually have community spaces that you can use. And a lot of the times they're more than happy to share their space. We've also found that a lot of apartment complexes have their own community centers. And so that's where we go a lot of the time to host community meetings or workshops. It's easier for them. Most of the residents just, walk down, they know where the community center is. So it's also a really great space to use when you're hosting your workshops or events. Next slide, please. And so when you are going to host these workshops or community meetings, it's really important to do robust outreach. A lot of the times we hear from folks that are going to, invite residents and they just flyer, or maybe they post something on their website. And as much as, that as much as that is being used, unfortunately, it's not the best way to do robust outreach. A lot of the time that we find that a lot of folks, especially maybe in lower income communities and rural communities, don't have access to the internet or to a computer. And so it's really difficult for them to get that information online. And so we always suggest that you use the existing infrastructure that exists in those communities to do that robust outreach. So for example, again, partnerships with CBOs is really important. A lot of the time we share information with other people. If we have like an ongoing relationship with an affordable housing developer, they share information with us and we share it with the community. Or if there's, again, parents or leaders that, our parents who go to school and they have meetings there, that's another great way of like asking them to please share your information for a community meeting or the project. Another way to do robust outreach is through Facebook groups, school robocalls, or community email listservs. For example, we work in the East Coachella Valley, and a community there has a Facebook group where they share a lot of their, community events. We use that to share a lot of our ongoing work or any event that we might be having. That's a great way to really get the word out there when it comes to your project or hosting a community meeting. There's also the faith-based groups and CBOs, school community engagement centers, great place to like share flyers or just leave flyers there. Most already have contact lists, and they can reach out to the folks that they have relationships with. And then again, passing out flyers and leaving flyers, another way to do outreach, but might not get you the most engagement. There's also door-to-door outreach, which can be a little bit like, it definitely can be helpful in the sense of like, if you have a connection with a CBO or just someone, a leader that can, or you can do that that's also, it helps having a conversation with residents and sharing the type of project, the purpose, the goal, and that can definitely lead to a larger participation for your community meeting or workshop. Next slide, please. And so now I'm going to be talking a little bit about like a community meeting guide. So how to create an inclusive space and also responsive meetings where residents are actually giving feedback, what content should be included, and how to make it accessible. Next slide, please. Accessibility is really important when working with residents, particularly low-income residents or communities. There should, if you are thinking about building a project in a specific area where the prominent language is not English, it's always important to have an interpreter or everything translated in that language, just to be able to make sure that they can participate and feel comfortable to participate in your community meeting or workshop. We also really suggest that you hire an interpreter that has like can bring headsets, create all of the presentations and materials in those languages. A lot of the time, residents come to these workshops, you know, at the end of the day after they're done working or picking up the kids. So a lot of the time they're tired, they're hungry. So we do suggest if you have the capacity to provide childcare and food, it really helps in having like a fruitful conversation with them because they're not tired, they're not hungry, they're able to really fully engage in the conversation and give like constructive feedback. And then also, again, location and time is super important. A lot of the time, like I said, residents, most of the time, if you are really wanting robust engagement from residents, the best time to really meet them is when they're available. So it's not going to be 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. It's going to be most of the time like in the evenings after work. So 5 p.m., 6 p.m., sometimes even weekends. That's the best time to really, you know, engage with them. And again, you always want to meet them where they're at. Most of the time they bring their kids, which is also may not be fun for the kids to come and sit for like 2 hours. So we also always suggest having like a supervised table with activities so they can play games or color, and the parents can focus on listening to your presentation and giving feedback. And wherever you are hosting this, it should be a place that they know is safe, they feel safe, and easily found at a time that works best for residents. And again, it has to be ADA accessible. Sometimes we find that, you know, folks might have it in a place where maybe there are no like ramps or, you know, accessibility. So I think that's another really important part of hosting these community meetings. Next slide, please. Okay. So when getting feedback from residents, it's really important to be responsive to their comments, their concerns and solutions, because they are, again, volunteering their time to be able to help and give us much feedback for you all to be able to fully, you know, complete the narrative prompt in the AHSC application. It's if you one thing that we also suggest that might be helpful is like doing breakout groups because sometimes people feel more comfortable in smaller groups, and so maybe that's easier for them to be a little bit more like vocal and give, you know, feedback without feeling, you know, scared. Um, and another way of maybe collecting feedback is making it a little bit more fun. It's never fun to just be talked at. And so if you have like an activity with poster boards where you're asking them, the type of project they would like to see in their community, maybe giving them stickers to put in like some of the areas that you would want to see the most in. Um, so at least making it as interactive as possible. So one, they're, involved, and two, they're not, they don't kind of get tired and maybe not give as much information as you would want them to. Great way to visually have people provide input is, again, with stickers. We've seen that with some folks that have done that when they're trying to get engagement on like the type of housing they want to see. Um, surveys are sometimes a good way. we Surveys are difficult for certain communities just because, one, again, depending on the type of survey, if it's like electronic, folks we found is a really difficult way to engage them in those surveys because they don't have access, or maybe they don't have internet, or their internet is spotty. Surveys also tend to take a lot of time, and time that they don't have. And if it's very um, convoluted, or it has big terms, they tend to like just not want to deal with it. So maybe it depends on how the survey looks. That might be helpful. Um, and it should, if you are thinking of a survey, then it should be easy to read, and not take a long time to take. And maybe as an incentive, you can provide do like a raffle, and maybe a winner can take something home. It doesn't have to be anything big. We usually do like gift cards, or things like that. I think, and as you're getting feedback from the community, I think it's also really important to be transparent and upfront about the project that you are thinking about or that you are planning to do. Most of the time, residents think that, oh, if you're talking to me about a project, then that means that this is going to be built in 1 year, or this is going to be done in like 6 months. I think just being transparent about the process, how long it takes, maybe some of the obstacles, the continuous community engagement will give them like a better understanding of how long this is going to take and like what is realistic, and be a little bit more, you're building that trust with them, right? And so they'll be more willing to give better feedback, or just help in any way that they can. So being transparent on the process, the application, is also really important. um, Next slide, please. Okay, so I am going to pass it over to my colleague Emma, who will be talking about some of the examples of like in community engagement and applications, and lessons learned, and some advice. So I'll pass it over to Emma.
Yes, thank you, Giovanna. Appreciate all that great guidance that you provided. So I'm going to provide an example that we were part of in Bakersfield. This was mainly part of the Transformative Climate Communities Planning Grant, but there was a project that was part of the project list for TCC that was an AHSC project recommended for funding for round 6. So I want to start off by indicating the community engagement strategies that we utilized during the time. We did engage community during COVID. It was like, I think, September, October the end of 2020 into mid 2021. So community engagement during that time was a little difficult, a little challenging. I'm sure it was for all of y'all as well. And so we tried a variety of strategies at the time. We hosted a number of online workshops, which, as Joanna indicated, are not always the best because not everyone has access to internet. However, we tried our best to reach as many folks as possible by hosting workshops in the morning, during the day, in the evening, and multiple times throughout the week to try to reach as many folks as possible, and also engaged in working with or sharing the workshop flyers with partners and residents, resident leaders to ensure that folks were joining the workshops. We also held one-on-one interviews. The consultant, Dudek at the time, was responsible for calling folks who are community leaders and to receive feedback about the community needs and community infrastructure needs that they raised as priorities. We also held focus groups and surveys. However, again, as Giovanna was mentioning, surveys, were another way to supplement the information that we were receiving through the workshops and the focus groups. But what I wouldn't recommend solely relying on surveys, as they could be limiting. And we also engaged in social distancing outreach as much as we could. We made sure to wear our face covering, and we went out to post flyers in areas that were community convened. And we also went out to share flyers. Sometimes we would just leave the flyers on the door, or we would put them on people's car windshields to make sure that they would see it when they would leave. And so all of these strategies were used to receive feedback to inform the TCC application. However, bringing it back to the AHSC application, I do recommend, as Giovanna said, to take a look at the narrative questions even before you've started your application to ensure that the community engagement and feedback that you're collecting truly reflects the questions that are on the questionnaire. For example, one of the questions that is listed in the narrative is to discuss the pre-AHSC conditions. And so through the TCC process, we did engage community through a visioning process to see, to identify what the vision was for the community, for the future of their community, which did include a lot of sustainability, more transportation infrastructure, more affordable housing developments, and more anti-displacement policies and practices to ensure that the community could access the benefits from the funding that was coming down the line. We also ensured that the project boundaries were going to meet the designations for the affordable housing site. So take a look at that as part of the narrative too, because it does ask you if the project is going to be serving a priority population, if it's in a disadvantaged community, for example. So when engaging community, ensuring that you're also gathering feedback and information from the community to see whether or not your project site will truly meet those requirements, it will be very important. We also engage in a lot of collaboration with project partners. So Leadership Council was one of the first community-based organizations that supported with the community engagement. However, throughout the TCC process, we also engaged other community-based organizations that served East Bakersfield and Southeast Bakersfield, and who served a wide variety or a wide range of community members and stakeholders throughout the area. And this ensured that we were all working together to reach different populations to gather the most feedback and information from the community. I will also state that the community engagement led to a change in boundaries. So I didn't include the round 5 application for TCC, but the boundaries for round 5 did change drastically to really reflect what community was saying, which was to ensure that the benefits were going to a disadvantaged community that had not seen investment in many, many years. And the community engagement also led to the change in name for TCC, which at the beginning it was Revitalizing Downtown, and then for round 5 it changed to Southeast Strong, which reflected again the community feedback. So that's another example of how you can be responsive to community, right? It's not just a matter of taking down folks' needs and never coming back to how you address them. You really do have to ensure that your planning process, your application process reflects all of the collaboration and discussion that you had with community members, and your final products should also reflect the feedback that community is indicating. The city also ensured to have a meeting after each phase to communicate what the progress was with the applications with community. One of the other questions that is included in the in the AHSC application is future benefits and engagement. So I just pulled a few. I pulled a quote from one of the city staff members and an article to really emphasize how, you know, any community engagement process can be leveraged to also meet the requirements that are listed in the AHSC application. Now that the city of Bakersfield has this infrastructure of partners and a project list that we were able to develop through a call for projects, and more knowledge about the awards that the state is providing, we now have a stronger infrastructure to, you know, ensure that there are future benefits and that there's future engagement for future AHSC projects in the community. And so, as Giovanna mentioned, it's never too early to do outreach with community. In fact, you should be doing outreach every single time. You should probably already have a community engagement plan as part of your planning processes to ensure that you are reaching out to folks and that the questions that you're asking are not repetitive questions, and that they really are you know, getting to the impacts and the solutions that folks are identifying. And so, again, just want to bring it back to the quote, which says, "We plan to strategize with the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program to build healthier communities that protect the environment by increasing the supply of affordable places to live near jobs, stores, transit, and other daily needs." So, as I mentioned earlier, AHSC is a project or a program that is meant to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to improve the community conditions and public health outcomes. And so in this case, the city, you know, was awarded the AHSC funding for Renaissance at Baker, which is a 85 unit housing development in an area that is, you know, that experiences a lot of blight, and it's also in an area where folks raise the need for transit. So we're seeing different needs intersected through this project, and we're really excited to see what the future holds and seeing more funding coming down the line. And that is it for me. Any questions?
Thank you, Emma. We're now going to open it up for Q&A, and I know I see here that Natalia, I'm sorry, you had a question regarding what should our strategy be if during our outreach efforts we find out that what the community wants and values does not align with the program goals. We have done outreach in certain communities and they do not want more transit, they don't want multifamily residences, or they don't want more bike lanes. They want to keep their on-street parking, etc. Think a few things, Natalia, that I would suggest. So I think a lot of it is, you know, if it is really important to incorporate their feedback as much as possible. And that sometimes that might look like changing the project a little bit, or maybe finding another area, another location where the neighborhood might want to see a project like that. Also, if maybe being a little bit more responsive to the need more broadly. So like if the housing element calls for more production to meet the RENA goals, there's a few things that yeah you could do, and I don't know, Emma, if you have other suggestions, but I think it is tricky for sure when residents are seeing one thing, and sometimes I don't know how those community meetings or those responses have been, like maybe going more deeper into like why it is that they don't want some of these things. Maybe they have some unanswered questions that they're haven't asked. Um, but yeah, Emma, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
No, I think what you said sounds great. It just sounds like there's probably more opportunity for further discussion on the why, and perhaps a different program might be best suitable for that community.
Thank you. I see
Hey,
Kendall has a question. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
you can finish. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, no, it's okay. I was just saying that Kendall has a question. Can you say more about how to translate conceptual aspirational goals, less GHG emissions, better air quality, etc., into real world actionable benefits? Um, do you want to answer that, or I can?
Sure. Yeah, I could take
I
a stab
can.
at it.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Emma. No, I'm happy to add on if needed, but go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. This is definitely a tricky one. And this is why we say that surveys is not necessarily the best form of receiving feedback, because I think we're naturally inclined to just say, do you want to see a reduction of GHG emissions? How can we reduce GHG emissions? That would be your question probably, right? And while that's obviously what we want to get answered, having that, being the other person on the other side of the screen and reading that question does not really give you any context as to what that really means and what the benefit of that would be. So I would say that when you're having difficulty talking through these conceptual and aspirational goals, maybe engaging in the focus groups discussions would be better, so that you're able to provide that context and provide an example, right? So if I'm talking to community members about reducing GHG emissions, I will also explain what they are, where they come from, what the health impacts of those emissions are, and would talk about ways that we can reduce emissions, right? So you have to share the entire part of it. You can't just say how do you want to reduce emissions? And also again talk about the benefits of reducing emissions and how we could get there, right? So if I say one of the ways to reduce emissions is by rerouting trucks away from your community, or by adding vegetative barriers, or adding more greening, or improving active transportation modes, then you've already provided a list of different project ideas that the community can choose from, and also, put in practice or tangibly understand, rather than just how do you want to reduce GHG emissions. I hope that was helpful. Kristen, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would just add that that's the crux of this program, right? So if you're getting feedback that seems vague and people are concerned about air quality, or want, like specifically mention they want to reduce GHG emissions, one, by nature of putting an AHSC application together, you will be reducing GHG emissions, but you also want to think about how to make that feedback tangible. So we've seen developers, in response to concerns about air quality, improve their filtration systems in their building, or concerned about kids walking to school, and AHSC might fund like a walking school bus program that helps pay caregivers or parents or what have you to walk kids to their local school. So there are ways to, I think, be creative and to be responsive to that feedback.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. There's also another question about the points. And I'm looking at the round 8 narrative prompt and required materials. So the community benefits and engagement, That provides a maximum of 6 points. The climate adaptation and community resilience provides 5 points. Collaboration and planning is 4, and equity and transformation is 3. And that's a total of 18 points. I can put the link in the chat for your review.
I think Kristen added the link.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Never mind.
No worries. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's one from Michelle about, I don't know if we answered this one, in neighborhoods where folks currently prefer to use their vehicles, and just noting, you know, ultimately this program seeks to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by getting folks into viable alternatives. So, you know, in the ideal scenario, you're using this funding to provide transit alternatives that, even if they couldn't be used year round, they do offer the opportunity to get to different neighborhood connections outside of driving a car. So kind of addressing all of that or any concerns in your narrative, I think, is key.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
thank you for raising that question, Michelle, because I know that that's something residents have raised in the past. And I think another way to address that, which is a longer term solution, is improving land uses and ensuring that the land use, like the zoning map, allows for mixed use development that provides, you know, access to community amenities that are in closer proximities to these housing development sites. Sorry, Giovanna, go ahead.
no, thanks, Emma. Thanks for adding to that. I was just going to respond to Gretchen regarding the slides, but I see that Christine said that there will be a follow-up email sent that will include the slides from today's presentation. Just wanted to see if there were any more questions.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a question about approaching crime prevention through environmental design. I mean, I think maybe if Christine has some thoughts on that, it might be better suited to answer the question. But I mean, I think if community members are, if that's not, yeah, I don't know. I guess, Christine, do you have some thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I don't know about like directly like crime prevention per se, right? But we have seen that when you're, say there's, I think there was a project a while ago that was developing new sidewalks to access a transit stop or station, and that sidewalk didn't have lighting. And so, you know, folks were concerned about needing to use that type of infrastructure to access transit. And so this program, you know, responded to that need by adding lighting, and it's now required that if you do have any sort of publicly accessible infrastructure, that it is adequately lit. So that's kind of a small example. I wouldn't say that this program is necessarily oriented around crime prevention directly, right? But certainly I think if folks are concerned about accessing different types of, you know, bike, pedestrian, transit infrastructure, that you want to see how you can be responsive to that through the projects you're funding.
All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for joining, and I hope this helped as you're, you know, looking at the projects that you're applying to or submitting for an application for AHSC, feel free to reach out. If you all do have any additional questions, I think, like Christine said, we'll share the presentation out. But yeah, thank you again all for joining. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.